There's nothing fans of team sports hate more than a moral victory because in the end, a loss is still a loss. Making the playoffs and contending for a championship is based solely on wins and losses, and as a famous coach said, you are what your record is. The UFC, however, is different. Wins and losses matter along with your skill set, but if you're entertaining and if you have the following, you can jump the line. If you bring it on the right stage and the fans get behind you, it can change your career. In this scenario, even a loss can be a long-term win. With that said, here are 5 fighters whose stock went up after a loss. Number 5, Doo Ho Choi vs. Cub Swanson, UFC 206. I don't need to tell you how great this fight was, it's in the Hall of Fame for God's sake. Doo Ho Choi and Cub Swanson went back and forth in a complete slugfest for 3 rounds, with Cub getting the narrow victory. The fight obviously was named Fight of the Night, along with Fight of the Year for 2016. Choi has dealt with injuries since then and has only fought 3 times since that bout. Choi recently stepped back into the octagon in a majority draw against Kyle Nelson due to a point deduction in a fight he was well in control of. Even though it was 7 years since the Cub fight, there was still a buzz around Choi's return. Number 4, Arman Tsarukyan vs. Mateusz Gamrot, UFC Fight Night. After a loss at his age as well as any versus Islam Makhachev, Tsarukyan went on a 5-fight win streak before his next toughest test in Gamrot. Words cannot do this fight justice. It was an incredibly skillful back and forth between these 2 great fighters. Many MMA pundits thought Tsarukyan won the fight. And despite the loss, the major talking points centered around a potential rematch between Tsarukyan and Makhachev. Tsarukyan would go on to defeat Damir Ismagulov, who himself was on a 19-fight win streak. Number 3, Justin Gaethje vs. Eddie Alvarez, UFC 218. Justin Gaethje had some hype coming into the UFC from his dominance in what was then known as the World Series of Fighting. His debut against Michael Johnson was a classic, but it was his loss against Eddie Alvarez which put him on the map. In his first UFC pay-per-view, Gaethje and Alvarez engaged in a barbaric showcase of leg kicks and wild striking. Alvarez won the fight, but was wearing it at the end with one cheek completely swollen. Alvarez was always a respected fighter, but I feel Gaethje's popularity took a major bump after this fight. Number 2, Gilbert Burns vs. Khamzat Chimaev, UFC 273. Gilbert Burns once rattled off 6 straight wins en route to a UFC title fight against Kamaru Usman, but you could argue that it was his loss to Khamzat Chimaev that was his most famous performance. Despite his resume and being ranked number 2 in the world at welterweight, Burns was a heavy underdog in the matchup against the wrecking ball that was Khamzat Chimaev. Burns and Khamzat put on an instant classic. The narrative post-fight was more about Khamzat looking human for the first time ever, despite winning the fight and continuing his undefeated streak. Burns would go on to dominate Neil Magny in his next fight, proving the old saying, there are levels to this. And number 1, Alexander Volkanovski vs. Islam Makhachev, UFC 284. After cleaning out the featherweight division, Volkanovski went up in weight to face newly crowned champion Islam Makhachev. Not many people gave Volkanovski a chance, mainly because he was going up in weight and Islam is big for the weight class to begin with. Volk showed why he was a champion, pushing Islam to the limit in a tough decision loss on his home turf. The talk post-fight was how impressive Volkanovski looked, not Islam defending his title. Despite losing the fight, it was almost as if he cemented his number 1 pound-for-pound status with this performance. What's your top 5 look like? Comment below and please like and subscribe for more. I'm Sean from the Octagon Observer, and I'll see you later.